Hey guys, it's Lucid, and I'm going to be talking about my Dominions 6 wishlist. I think somebody made a post in the Steam forums about it, and that got other people thinking about it. I think Christopher even responded, and yeah, so I don't know. What I have done though, this isn't just my list. I have gone and I have a thread here in Discord. I'll pause and show it to you. All right, I've got a thread here in Discord, the Dominion 6 wishlist, which you can see has 940 posts to it. And in it, I shared kind of starting out what were some of my thinkings of what I would like, and then I've added to it as people have commented. But if I didn't really love the idea, or I thought it would be maybe too hard to implement, or whatever, just wasn't my thing, I didn't want to stand behind it, it didn't make it in here. But yeah, a lot of people had thoughts, comments, feedback. Yeah, 1,000 posts, boys. This was only in like a few days. So, yeah, let's get to it. I want to talk a little bit about maybe why I might release it here. If we look at all the games that have been released by Illwinter, they had Dominions 1, released back in 2001. 2 years later, popped out 2. 3 years after that, popped out 3. For Dominions, it was a long time, relatively, until the release of 4. It's basically 7 years. But only 4 years between that and the release of 5. We're now 5 years after 5, and it's like, okay, maybe it's, they're thinking about releasing 6. The other context, of course, is that between the release of Dominions 3 and Dominions 4, which was this really long gap, they made an entirely new game, right? They made Conquest of Elysium. So that was released in 2012. A year after that, they released Dominions 4. Presumably, they'd probably been working on it a little bit before they decided to focus on Conquest of Elysium. And then, yeah, basically we had Conquest of Elysium 4 in 2015. So that was part of this 4-year gap. Basically, it was 2 years between release. And, that makes you think, hey, maybe, 1 or 2 years after the release of Conquest of Elysium 5, we might see Dominion 6. And there's other people speculating about what Illwinter may be doing with their time. Perhaps they're releasing Trade and Taint, which was a kind of cool concept I saw. I think they had like a blog post about it or something. Anyhow, who knows what they're doing? And one of the cool things about being indie developers is you get to do whatever you want to. And you get to put whatever content in your games you want to, and you get to make games or not make games based on what you want in them. But as a fan, this is what I would like in the game, maybe. And it's not just my opinion, it represents other people in the community too. But it's all filtered through me. So nothing has made it on this list if I'm like, nah. I'm going to talk a little bit about what would make it into potentially make it into a game, right? Because Illwinter in general isn't they're not really trying to test out a ton of balanced stuff in the base game. If modders can put stuff in, so if somebody has a balance complaint, if the modding ability exists in the game for fans to figure it out and tweak it themselves, that's kind of what Illwinter tends to do. Now, they have incorporated, they certainly have done balance changes, many balance changes in the past, but they tend to be slow in incorporating balance changes in, and I actually like that, because, when developers, fix, air quote, right, balance issues in the game really quickly, it's kind of like players are complaining about things they don't like or things that seem overpowered. And instead of figuring out the counters to it or how to deal with it, the problems just magically go away by the developers, right? And by being slow to fix balance issues, then, players really get to struggle with it and see if there's really ways to work around it. And I like that a lot. But what we have seen Illwinter do is between Dominions 3 and Dominions 4. So one of the main issues in Dominions 3 was you had these items you could make, and the items would generate gems, not temporary gems, but straight up gems. There's a few of them still left in the game as unique artifacts, like the Fever Fetish. There were a bunch of them. Clam of Pearls used to be one. And a huge part of the game revolved around making a bajillion of these items, stashing them on commanders you didn't think would die, harvesting the items, which was a tedious process of like going into each commander's inventory and pulling the items out, or the gems out, and then using all those gems you got from those items to make ridiculous amounts of stuff. But people didn't like this. They didn't feel like that's what Dominions should be, making items, harvesting gems from them, and using that to make like an infinite amount of troops, right? Because it kind of breaks the fundamental game loop of like conquer land, get more stuff, conquer, to have more power, and then conquer more people and win. You just get to like sit there and turtle and make items, and you have no idea how many of these like boosters, how many of these like farmable items people had. It just kind of wasn't, it was kind of shit, right? The most popular mod at the time for Dominions 3, Conceptual Balance mod, fixed that and got rid of it. You couldn't do it. Everybody was playing games using Conceptual Balance mod. That was like the thing to do back then, was use Conceptual Balance mod. Use it for single player, use it for multiplayer. And by the time Dominions 4 came out, Illinois was like, yeah, that's not really a good feature. We're going to get rid of those items or change them, right? And that, I believe, was when temporary gem items became available. It became a thing. So they do, and, there's been other balance changes, like they tweaked the Macone balance, they've tweaked the Pythium balance, they've tweaked various nations that were thought to be, like, underpowered, maybe give them some more stuff. Some nations which were overpowered, like Late Age Ulm, which had the vampire count spam. They tuned that back, and instead of getting like an infinite number of vampire counts, get like even cooler, but unique and limited vampire counts, which was awesome. It was like one of the coolest ways to do a balance change for a nation. So they are interested in balance, but they're not often changing things quickly. They don't feel the need to like have a perfectly balanced vanilla game. They kind of like to let the player base struggle with things, or at least that's what it seems like, right? Figure out how to solve a problem rather than have the developers come in and fix it. So what they tend to want, and then, what do you want to do for like the difference between like a patch and like a major game release? So coming from Dominions 4 to Dominions 5, they reworked the entire battle system. Like it went from basically turn-based combat in the battle to basically like a real-time engine. And that had just a host of changes. And of course, there's a bunch of weird things you would never think about when you're like, okay, we're going to make it real-time. That are like, like the archery targeting became all of a sudden a really big deal, and spell targeting, and first strike, and all of this stuff. There became so many rippling consequences from like a big feature change like that. But, that was like a cool selling point where it's like, okay, do you want to go from 4 to 5? Are you going to buy the new game? And people are like, oh, real-time combat. Yeah, that looks pretty freaking cool. And it was cool. It was an awesome addition. I think people complained about it. Some of the old vets, grumbled about it at the beginning. But look, the player base hasn't really looked back. So yeah, you're looking at like, what are the big new features we want that are going to make people really excited to buy a new game? And look, there's a huge part of the Dominions community that are just going to buy the new game no matter what. And kind of, I think every time in the Steam forums when there's a new game announced, they're like, oh, is it going to be worth it? People are like, should I buy it? And there's a big crew of people who are like, really asking the question, should I buy it? A lot of it's like the single player crew. Because it's like, really, how much better is the single player experience going to be? The core, like, multiplayer, really dedicated crew is, and this includes also a lot of people who play single player, they're just going to buy it no matter what. And they just see it as like every 5 years we pay Illwinter for a big patch. And in the meantime, we get a bunch of small patches for free, right? But anyway, to get a lot of the the non-super hardcore people, it's nice to have big features that are going to sell the game. I would just pay them, an annual subscription for cool updates if they're doing updates all year long. So you want some features in there which are going to service, like they're going to be big, showy, people are going to look at it, they're going to want to buy it. There's a lot of things though that like, like somebody who's looking to buy Dominions for the first time, if it's listed as a feature, they're not going to know. Like it's like, there's some things that are going to be awesome, but it's for the fan base. It's for the people that are going to buy the game anyway, right? And it's like, you can make stuff for them, and they're going to really, really thank you for it, and they're going to be even more fanboys, right? But they probably would have bought your game anyway. So, but that's a lot of what's going to be in this list, because, look, I'm a fanboy. But there's going to be other stuff which I think will, like, help attract new players. But yeah, it's also going to include, like, bigger UI and mechanics changes. It's not so much, the things that are going to be in this list aren't so much going to be, like, little dinky content or balance changes as much. It's like bigger mechanical things for a whole new version of the game. And yeah, I'm going to make some recommendations for, like, these are some of the balance things that I think would be great to tweak going into Dominion 6. But they're not going to be things, for the most part, which are new, right? The only things that are going to be new are things that you literally cannot do through modding. A lot of the other modding things, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, there's balance mods out there. I think mostly leave those alone, or, you know, and I think it's fine to leave those alone. But some of the things which have really broad adoption, it's like, okay, like, I think a lot of people have said, like, this is what they like. You know, it's worth thinking about porting that into the base game. There's also, if you go in the Steam thread, there's a Wishlist thread that Christopher made. It's got almost 5,000 posts in it. So probably a little overwhelming. But you can go through there and look. And if they read all 5,000 posts, that would be amazing. Here's a way that I've kind of broken it down. We got a bunch of things to talk about. And I think a great way to break it down, this is for, like, if you're looking to identify what scope you want to do in anything. Like, I did a lot of consulting in engineering companies, and you're, like, looking at, like, what are the features we want to incorporate on the next iteration of the product or whatever. A great way to do it is you make a heat chart of how difficult it is to do the change, how much it will cost, or however you want to grade that, right? Against how big of an impact will it have? You know, like, how much money will it save us if we do it? How many more customers will we get? However it is you rate the impact. In this case, I have a decent idea of, like, what the impact would be. Either how much the player base would care about it, or how much, you know, maybe it might be showy to new players. I mean, I have my guess at it, right? But my guess is probably as good as anyone's. What I don't really know is how hard it would be to implement in the software, but I have some idea, right? I have an idea of which things would be pretty easy. Like, they could basically be done via modding already. That would be, like, the easiest thing would be, which, by the way, very easy and very impactful is up here. It's a 5 out of 5, right? A 1 out of 1, which is the lowest it could be, would be very difficult and very low impact, right? And so we're not actually going to have any 1s out of 1s, because if I thought it was a 1 out of 1, I'm not going to put it on the list. But yeah, anyway, that's basically how this heat chart works. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the AI players, like, not spellcasting AI as much. This is about, like, how do we make the AI, the single player experience, better? And we're going to start by talking about the things over here. So the first thing is basic resource allocation. Okay, no. Actually, the first thing we're going to talk about is basic Diplo, but I think I have them all here as a 4. Highly impactful, right? So 5, but 4 on the difficulty. This is my guess. Doesn't seem that hard to do, right? So the most basic, I think the most important thing for single player is having some basic diplomacy, so that you're not in a forever war with the AI for forever. There's complicated ways to do it, and there's easy ways to do it. And I'm not saying which way is the better way to do it. And I'm not saying the ways I'm going to list are the only ways to do it. But one very easy way to do it is you just get every 10 turns. It's like the most basic Diplo option. You can force peace with one of the AI players you're playing against at current borders. And they would have to re-decide to declare war at you, and maybe they couldn't do it for 5 or 10 turns, right? So that's like the most basic thing. You hardly have to change the UI, just tiny bits, right? You don't really need to have a very complicated system for managing resources and diplomacy and how much they care about different things. You can just make peace every 10 turns. Probably has to change a little bit in, like, the game save file. Not that hard, right? This is the most basic Diplo. It would make the single player experience so much better, especially if you're playing on big open maps. And maybe, you know, you could have this where you could tweak it. Maybe you get 2 peace tokens every 10 turns, right? And the peace tokens could last for different amounts of times. Maybe that could be configured in the game settings. However it is, I feel like that basic Diplo would make single player way, way better. Not to say it's the best way to do it. There's certainly way more complicated ways that 4X games have managed diplomacy. And diplomacy in multiplayer is really complicated. And if you want to start like simulating that with the AI, like you can spend a ton of time doing this. The next thing that I think will have a huge impact on the AI, and it's not something we can fully do with modding, we've tried, is basic AI resource allocation. All right, here's how it should be. First, you spend money on mages. You max out mage recruitment in all of your forts, right? Then you spend money on troops. You max out national-only troops. That's it, right? No, we could include foreign recruit national troops, but no indies, right? That's where all the remaining part of your gold goes. Then, if you weren't able to spend all of your gold doing that, that means you need more infrastructure. So build labs and temples in your forts, if you have that left over. Once you've spent labs and temples and forts, then decide to build new forts, right? So set random commanders around the map to build forts. If you don't have commanders, build some, and then next turn you'll probably pick them up in that cycle. If you do that, once that's done, then allocate money to PD, right? Maybe up to a certain threshold, right? And then if you have money left over that, maybe then we allow the AI to do indies, right? But I think that's like questionable. But that basic resource allocation is a big change. One of the things you can go look at is this for everybody. If you go look at Taurek, he has, I think I'll put a link to it. He has a thread on one of the forums about, basically he's analyzed the AI. He's watched them with the Omniscience mod and seen how they play and kind of analyzed what they do. And he's got a big, long, hairy list of problems. Some of them I have reflected here, right? Some of them I don't. But yeah, one of the things is they don't build enough forts, right? And they don't have enough forts with labs and temples in them. And that's because they're busy doing PD and indies and stuff. So in general, the AI needs more forts and temples. The way you get that is by fixing the resource allocation, right? These are like very long levers to make the single player experience better. Why is the single player experience important? Because that's what most new players come in to do. Most new players who like download Dominions 6 when it comes out, they're not going to like jump immediately into the multiplayer community. Most people are going to play it for like a year plus before they jump in. Right? So having a more satisfying single player experience, really big deal for selling the game and for like attracting new players, which is something that I think everybody in the multiplayer community wants. Next up, we have advanced thugging, right? So we have basically two kinds of thugging that I have on here: basic thugging and advanced thugging. Advanced thugging would be really awesome, right? Like if to do advanced thugging, the AI would have to know what are good thugging items. So that could just be a flag that gets put in the game, like Frostbrand, Vine Shield. We could just come up with a bunch of things. Some Armor of Knights, right? Dragon Helm. Like you can just have a flag in the game. It's like these are good thugging items. The AI is also going to have a way to identify what are good thugging units, meaning they have a lot better stats than humans, right? Or good thugging paths. And then the AI is like, okay, let's make thugging kits rather than just random items, whatever it's deciding. Like, let's make an entire kit. And then when it has a kit, then put the whole kit on a unit that's a good thug. And then script it for the best 3 buffs it can get for the first 3 cycles and then have it run in. And maybe it would even look at things like trying to be fatigue neutral. Like, you could get really advanced with thugging. Basic thugging, like without really getting into all that's actually pretty simple. It's basically just like find out which units are good thugs based on having better stats than being a human. And instead of putting items on random mages, put it on thugs, like units that pass that criteria. And instead of having those guys cast spells like a normal mage would, you have them buff for 3 turns and then attack. Right? But you're not necessarily giving them the best items. They're going to be basically doing random shit. Right? Like it's not going to look like a player thugging it. They're going to be doing random shit. But it will probably be on, units with really high defense or high protection or lots of hit points, right? And they'll have items on them, right? You're not going to have random items on mages. And you're not going to have unit and like mages with items on them sit there and cast spells, which is one of the things that happens in the game right now. The other thing that AI doesn't do is they don't have enough priests with their sacreds. So, the AI should make enough priests to follow their sacreds around. These things are like not that hard to do, I don't think, right? Like it would be engine changes. It's not something we can do with modding, but how hard can it be to make enough priests and put them with armies that have sacreds, right? It's like, do we have enough priests for this army to roll out? If no, make more priests, and then next turn you should, and then you roll the army out, something like that. And then you could have some override case. Anyway, I don't even know. This next one's a big thing, mages and armies. One of the things Taurek found was that mages and armies tend to be on this, because we've actually, and Loggy has been able to actually kind of hack the game and get it where we could see the AI turn files, right? So we can see how they're scripting their armies, etc. And we've been looking at it. Mages in general and stay behind troops. So I don't know. I think here's the thing. The big change is, and the other thing is sometimes you'll have like 10 mages with like 10 troops in them go out and attack. And then other times you'll have like a 200 person army with like 3 mages in it. And it's like, look, when you have a big army with a lot of troops, that's where you should put a lot of mages. Don't put a lot of mages by themselves, right? So put more mages in armies. When you're rolling out like a 200 or 300 person army of national troops, it should have a lot of national mages, right? And put a lot of them on advance and cast instead of stay behind troop. It can be a mix, some of them can be on cast spells, some of them can be on advance and cast, some of them can be on stay behind troops. That's great. Could even be random. But more on advance and cast would be good. And having more mages in armies would be good. And being disinclined from sending out large numbers of mages without lots of troops. Those would be pretty meaningful improvements to the AI. The other thing is having random... One of the things that Taurek found was that having... So we're now getting to the less impactful stuff. But that the AI basically didn't do a great job site searching. And a lot of that's because they would only site search forts that they had provinces they had forts in and labs. And that's because they had mages sitting around. So presumably they're not site searching because they're not in the provinces very much. So one thing that you can kind of hit a few birds with a few stones is just make it so the AI likes to keep random mages wandering around from province to province, right? Sometimes it stays in the province, sometimes it moves. When it stays in the province, it's likely to site search. And you put a couple gems on them, and you put them on advance and cast. And guess what? Those mages, just a few mages with random gems that will work for given the paths that they have, that will make a huge difference to how difficult it is to like raid with thugs. And presumably, the AI is not going to be having 60 PD anymore because it's actually able to make troops and forts and stuff like that. So, I think, by the way, if these changes are made, the vanilla AI is going to get a lot harder. Like, playing on Impossible is going to be really hard because basically the AI land will start forting up. Like, players normally have like 1 fort every 4 provinces. On Impossible AI, it would probably be able to have 3 forts every 4 provinces, right? And max out production of them. That is a lot of nastiness. That's basically like playing with Gifts of Nature's Bounty all game, right? That's going to be a very hard AI to beat. But yeah, having, but if they're not having like 50 PD everywhere, 15 PD plus a random mage behind it with some gems actually gives you interesting targets to do raiding against with thugs, unlike the current situation, which is like you need to have a thug who's basically a super combatant to kill 50 PD in every province. But yeah, just random mages wandering around, site searching, carrying a couple gems on advance and cast makes huge changes to how well the AI would do. The other thing is the AI typically has pretty horrible builds. One of the things players do if you want to have like a really serious single player game, and you can do this in your games, by the way, you set all of the players to human when you start. So like if you have a 12 player game and you're playing single player, you set them all to human. You build a custom pretender for each player, and then you set them to AI after the first turn. And then the AI will actually have like a cool build. Now, this could be done in Dominions. I think this is something that, like, it would be kind of tough to do, not from, like, a game mechanic perspective. I'm sure game mechanic-wise it would be pretty easy. But you'd have to probably coordinate with the community or come up with a bunch of really good lists on your own. But, I mean, honestly, we could get the community to make 10 rather different builds for every nation. And we could have, you know, some out there builds, too. Right? Like, you wouldn't want 10 that are, like, variations on a theme. You'd want 10 like really different ones, but that kind of work. And yeah, I mean, it would be super easy for the player base to make 10 builds for every nation, and then those could go basic. You know, Illwinter could take those and then put them into the base game. That you could have random things that the AI picks, which are completely random, or it could give you a random one for the AI off of that list of 10 builds per nation. So, but that would be another major improvement to single player. The AI would be way more interesting to fight against, because if it has sacreds that it's using priests to bless and they actually have interesting builds, it would be way cooler and way harder and way more fun. And I think a lot of us YouTubers would probably start putting up a lot more single player content because it would be way more interesting. There'd be like way more interesting puzzles to solve. So anyway, that's definitely on the wish list. I think that would be super cool. I mean, there's probably a way to do it where it's moddable too, so that like you could have like some archive or some folder, like maybe it's a zip folder of new lords or something. So somebody could like make a zip folder of new lords, and that goes like in a special Dominions folder, so people could like share these. And you could have a setting where if one of those exists for the nation, that the AI picks, it will use one of those rather than a random build. So, you know, there's lots of ways to think about it, lots of ways to do it. But anything along those lines, I think, would be awesome. The other thing is just, Dominions 5 does do less indies than it did in Dominions 4. But there's still too many indies, guys. It's ridiculous. But really, this problem, you can just make it. Like, there's a mod, don't recruit indies. I've got it. It makes single player better. But it's not perfect, because in some ways the AI still doesn't forward up enough to make enough national troops. And because of that, they end up putting their money in PD. And the thing is that if you're trying to expand, it's actually better to make indies than to like just be horrible at expansion and have tons of PD everywhere, right? So in some ways, the no indies mod can kind of hurt with expansion a little bit. But basically, the resource allocation's the better fix. But no indies is like super easy, right? It's not as impactful as this. Like, there's way more impactful doing resource allocation, but this is super easy. Like, this is as easy as it could be. Just basically take one of the AI no recruit mods and integrate it into the game. And the thing is, I think especially for this, like where we're looking at like how to make the AI players better, it's like, oh, this could be done through modding. It's like, yeah, but people who are buying the game, like the people who are going to be buying Dominion 6, they're not going to be coming in doing like the full mod setup right out of the gate. They're going to be like playing it, maybe watching a guide and trying to like figure out how to tread water and survive. And having the AI like use swarms of indies where they all look the same, like all the AI players basically look the same, not very cool. Having the AIs where they have like tons of like nationally themed troops coming at you, very cool. Anyway, that's that. Advance and cast is another big one. I had that separate here, but because this is actually, if you just want to fix the advance and cast thing, it's pretty easy, right? Just make it so the mages aren't advance and cast rather than cast spells. Stay behind troop, they will still wander forward if you don't have archers or something, right? Like they'll still, if you only have melee units, AI mages will wander behind them casting spells. But advance and cast is a lot better in a lot of cases. So having that mixed in would be very good. All right, that's it for AI players, but we are not done, guys. Next, we have content. What is content? These are like balance changes, new features, all this stuff. A little harder to read here. 5 out of 5, the most impactful thing is probably a Sermon of Courage rework. Why is it 5 out of 5 for both of them? It's easy to do. Like, I already know kind of what it is in the game engine that has to change. We cannot fix it through modding. But basically, the way the game works, right now, Sermon of Courage is like a separate thing, but there's like a fierce slider, right? And we can actually use this to visualize it. Normally, you don't have any fear, right? But as you start sitting there, with fear, your fear slider will go up, and it's capped at 5. Right, so once your fear slider's at 5 for a unit, your morale's going to go down by 5. This number, so far as I can tell in vanilla, doesn't really recover. So once you lose morale, you're basically toast. If you get preached on, if you get sermoned of courage, it would if you were at 5 fear, it would knock you. So let's say you were at you were at -5 morale because of fear. Okay, let's say you were at 10 morale. You had 5 fear checks applied, so you go to 5, right? So that's -5. And then you get hit with Sermon of Courage, you go up by 1, so you go up to 6. But you get hit by Sermon of Courage again, you don't go any higher. The Sermon of Courage doesn't get rid of fear. And basically that's the change we wanted to make, is for it to, instead of targeting, instead of being like a separate +1 can only cast once, it would instead be able to fully erode the fear. This actually has, okay, this isn't like a big change. Why do you have it as a 5 impact? Morale plays are one of the more oppressive things in Dominions. Like, Blood Rain, Wailing Winds is ridiculous. Blood Rain, Wailing Winds, and Dark Skies is very oppressive. And there's not a ton of counters to it. There are some. And a lot of players cry really hard about morale plays. It's totally broken. There's nothing you can do. And there are things you can do. And I don't want to nerf Wailing Winds or Blood Rain. I think they're fine. But if there were more counterplay, I think that would be good. There's Growing Fury, there's trying to end the battle fast, there's things you can do. But Sermon of Courage right now, you need to be Holy 2 to cast it, and it sucks how it is today. It's not a great spell. If it was instead where it would erode the fear thing, and it could get you all the way up maybe to +1 or +2, then if you're fighting into morale plays, you might want 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 Holy 2s just to keep buffing your troops up to get them, because the Wailing Winds is going to tick their morale down and it keeps fluffing them back up to full morale. That would be really freaking cool. That would be amazing. So, I think a Sermon of Courage rework would be great because it's probably what the game needs for giving some more needed counterplay to morale plays. So that's that. Next, on the very high impact, but now more difficult, battlefield spell graphics. The battlefield spells are not amazing. Firestorm, Wrathful Skies is pretty cool looking, right? I forget what the Meteor one is. Meteor Shower, that's pretty fucking cool looking. Other spells, Foul Vapors, not amazing. I just think for having really cool battles, people putting up cool stuff on YouTube, for the game trailer, it just seems to me like a very long lever, right? If you make the battlefield enchantments cooler looking, it seems to me that's going to sell games. Plus, it's going to make just more epic fights. The fights are going to feel cooler. And epic fights, by the way, are one of the things Dominion specializes in. Most of the time you're not dealing with such big armies in other 4X games. The scale of Dominions is really, really huge. So really cool battlefield-wide spells I think would be really cool. The other thing, we're going to have a couple things on here about blesses. There's basically if it would be nice if Illwinter rebalances some of the blesses after, 5 years of Dominions 5 games. And I can mention what some of these are. But the longer solution is make it moddable so that we can change the price. Maybe we can even change some of the bless effects. That would be really cool. I'm sure there's problems with it, so I'm sure it's hard to do. There's a bunch of bugs that could pop up and things like that. But that would be really cool if blesses were moddable in Dominion 6. I'll mention the bless rebalancing thing here. There's a bunch of blesses people don't really pick. Quickness is really good, but it's probably a little bit overpriced. Making it one path cheaper would probably be better. Things like Reanimate are just horrible, but they have the potential to be super cool. I love the idea of it, right? So maybe instead of 50% come back as soulless, maybe 100%, or I don't know what it is. Maybe you have a 10% chance of keeping the soulless after battle. Something like that to make some of the blesses that kind of suck right now better. The underwater blast probably too expensive. Like it'd be cool to take a blast to swim. It's a really good blast, but it's also probably too expensive right now. We could go through and look at each individual item, but they're there. And honestly, I think Illwinter could probably ping the community, and people could tell them what the blesses that really don't ever see any multiplayer play are. There's also like more general concerns about blesses. Like basically, okay, here's my spiel on blesses real quick. Is that used to be small blesses weren't very good, right? Like a rainbow, if you got a rainbow pretender in Dom 3, you could have like, plus 3 HP or something, or, plus 1 defense or something, but it wasn't like a big deal. And everybody, if you wanted a good blast, you would go like Earth 9, Nature 9, and you take like this big whomping blast and you get this big effect. And that kind of limited your pretender choice to like pretenders that made that option real good. And if you got a rainbow, it was just because you wanted the magic diversity or the site searching or something. Well, with the bless changes, they made it so that small blesses are really good. And I think that was like a really good change, because it's like, okay, well now we can have a god that, they can do really useful things with a small bless. The problem though is because the small blesses are good, the chassis that can get a lot of small blesses are like overpowered right now. So rainbows are also a bit overpowered. I don't actually think you fix that through changing the bless system. I think the bless prices are fine because they make it like where you can do something really cool and powerful with like an Earth 5 god. You don't need to go all the way up to Earth 8. The problem is really the rainbows where you can get everything. So I think the solution is to increase the path cost for rainbows or increase the base cost of rainbows, which you can do in the current modding system. So I don't know if that needs to be added to the game, but that's my bless spiel. Anyway, that's that. We're going to come back down here. Bless is moddable. Next thing is a flying underwater rework. And I think this is potentially like a really impactful, really cool idea, but it and adding planes are going to be really hard. Right? So these are like very difficult, but also very cool. The idea of flying is that, like a flying rework, is that you would basically have a whole nother plane, right? So like you have the base, like all the ground units are down here, and then flying above them, there could be like a whole aerial combat taking place between flying units. That would look super cool, I think. It could also be like cluttery and horrible, but I think it would look cool, especially if there were a way to like filter when you were looking at the battle which thing you were looking at, or you could look at both. But yeah, and then the flying units like have to take off and they actually fly across the battle. Then combat speed for flyers would be important, and then they could be hit by arrows while they're flying. That also makes a ton of sense. Like you would think archers would be good counters to flyers in a way. In the current game, they're not. Like flyers completely counter archers. And you would think like, hey man, it might be nice if I had some archers to kill all those stupid flyers. So I think it would be a much more realistic, it'd be a really cool overhaul if they figured out a cool way to make it work. But like having where you'd fly, you could maybe fight in the air, and then you'd have to land at some point. There are things you would have to include in that so that like the system wouldn't get cheesed. Like flyers have to land eventually, because we don't want like, you imagine flying archers would now be really strong, but you don't want it where the flying archers like never land, right? Like they run out of ammo and they just sit up there and time out the battle. No. Like everything that's flying has to land. And how the rules are about that, I don't know any of that, but I just know there's probably a cool way to set it up. Another thing is like, tell me this, guys. How is it that you have an underwater fort and you have like fish units that swim, but they can't swim over the wall? Tell me that. Tell me that. Another option for fixing some of the underwater stuff, like for the underwater battles, and by the way, this also causes like actual metagame problems. Like underwater fort stormings are the actual worst, because a lot of the evocations and things don't work underwater. Trying to storm an underwater fort is actual cancer in the late game. So, how would this rework fix? Well, basically the same thing. You have a second plane. You have like a flying plane. So some of the underwater units may be like swimmers, like a shark. It doesn't really swim in the normal water column on the floor mostly. It's mostly like swimming through the flying plane, right? And then when it finds somebody, it could like swim down and attack them if they're on the floor. Other things like Atlanteans, they might walk on the floor. If they needed to, they might be able to swim up over a wall because they can swim. They're in the water. Maybe they could or maybe they couldn't, And that would actually make it really hard to keep troops out of a underwater fort, which I think makes a ton of sense, right? Or maybe you could have a thing where there's like you have a roof on your fort and then underwater, and then some of the units can't swim in, or maybe there's like only a certain few holes in the roof or something. I don't know, But I think there's a lot you could do with that idea of like 2 planes in a battlefield, both for underwater and above water. So that's actually the flying underwater rework. Adding planes is actually different. This bullet adding planes is about, what if, like, one of the coolest things about Conquest of Elysium 5 was like you could go to all these different planes of existence. You could go to Inferno, you could go to Cocytus, you could go to like the Death Worlds. I forget exactly what that's called, to Hades. But it'd be really cool if there were a way to do that in Dominion 6. Like, I don't know what it would look like. It could just be there's like, by default, there's like certain planes you could toggle to. There's so many different ways to do it. Like, it could be there's like a mirror but smaller image of the whole world that exists in each of the dimensions, and you could like go to that. How that would work with other hand-drawn maps, tricky, right? So this is hard to implement. Could be that you're like, okay, the other planes you go to, they're not really going to have anything to do with the maps, but they're going to, they're just going to be like drawn independent of whatever the map is, and it's just another place you could go to. And that would be a pretty cool place to include like some really cool like graphics, like for just the default Inferno you go to, like what that area looks like it could be super cool. But yeah, no, I think the ability to do that, there's like people in the discussion thread had lots of cool ideas about how to access them. Like maybe you access those planes through thrones. Maybe you have special spells you can only cast at thrones. Maybe you have to build certain, structures in a fort or something. Like, who knows what it is? But I think it's a cool idea. I'm still going to buy Dominion 6 if it doesn't have this in it. I mean, absolutely. But I don't know. It's a cool idea, I think. It's on my wish list. This is one of the ones I don't really know how to implement. But I just know it has the potential to be cool. All right, more content stuff. Archery, counter spells. Okay, archery sucks in the late game. And here's why. You cast Arrowfend, now you're at 20% effectiveness for your arrows, right? Then you cast Storm. Your 1/5 effectiveness drops to 1/10 effectiveness. That means if you have 100 archers, which are not exactly overpowered units to start with, once both those spells go up, I believe you're right around the effective firepower of 10 archers for 100. You're like, okay, well, we get flaming arrows or something, right? Here's the other thing. When Army of Gold comes up, they don't do anything. Like, it counters the rest. Like, archers in the late game with Storm and Arrowfend and Army of Gold up, not only are they, like, pretty much countered, they're, like, completely countered. They will literally do nothing except run. Or run out of ammo and then maybe do something when they run into melee. They're completely worthless. But archers are really cool in the early game and mid game, and there's still important things you can do with them. And the game's still fun having archers in it, even though they get countered later, right? But the game would be better if there were something you could do against the counter spells. Some options are having a spell like True Arrows or something, or maybe it could be added into Wind Guide, or it could be a separate spell. And it negates the effectiveness of Arrowfend by half. And maybe it's at a higher research level than Arrowfend. So there's like a window where you have Arrowfend and you don't have the counter, but then later you get the spell like True Arrows that makes your arrows go through, maybe it increases the precision a little bit more, goes through Arrowfend. The other thing is, with the big protection buffs in the late game, it would be really great if there were also like a Weapons of Sharpness version that could apply to arrows, right? So maybe it's like a Weapons of Sharpness for arrows, could be area of effect. Maybe it's only 20% piercing rather than the full 50%. But it could also stack with things like crossbows. So now your crossbows have even more penetration. But I think like a 20% AP AoE buff or something that would make it where you could do damage to like high protection units in the late game would be super cool. It would make the game way better if archers had more of a place where they weren't just completely countered. And maybe the True Arrow spell also negated by half the effectiveness of Storm. Anyway, that's this idea. We can't really do that, I don't think, with mods. This would take Illwinter. Next up, we have another weaker relief spell. Fatigue plays almost as overpowered as Morale plays. They're really strong, and it's cool. I don't think they should be nerfed. You know, they did get a little bit nerfed in Dominions 5, I think, with them increasing the gem cost of Rigor Mortis. But I think it would be really cool, and this could be done with modding, I think. But it would be cool if there were a weaker relief spell. You know, that maybe it procs less, because relief is already a really small value. You know, maybe it procs less frequently or something, and it's in a different path. So it could be Earth, could also, you know, target Encumbrance, or, if you're really countering Rigor Mortis, you really want it to target Fatigue, not Encumbrance. But, that way, if you have both of them up, you wake up more often when Rigor Mortis is up. You know, that seems to me like a good addition to the game for... This is going to be stuff that is not going to really help the new players come into the game. This is going to be stuff that's going to be for us. This is like the core fan base stuff. This next one, though, actually I think would help with game sales and new players and things like that. And that's being able to poke holes in walls. So imagine as you sit on a fort, you get rid of the wall defense. What if you could go negative? What if the farther negative you went, the more holes were in the wall, or you could have siege towers? Siege towers might be better to implement mechanically, because if there are archers on either side of a wall hole, you just have to make sure the wall holes were pathable from the wall, so they could get down. You don't want unpathable terrain. But yeah, whichever way this works. But just having it where, like, the longer you were on a fort, the more negative the fort was, the more wall holes you get. And that gives a lot more strategic options in, like, how long do you sit on a fort? How much siege strength do you want to bring? And it helps with some of the more super annoying things. Like, it gives you some counterplay to some of the more annoying things. Like, I'm just going to skelly spam and fill up the front gate. But it's cool that if you want to storm a fort quickly and you only can bust open the front gate, you still are going to have to deal with that. So I think it's a really cool idea. This wasn't mine. Somebody else had it. Next, is, still just as cool probably, but harder to implement. Maybe taking a bit more time. Would be like a whole class of items for commanders. So I don't know, just more things to like think about for like leading troops better. Like maybe the troops under your command, if you have a certain item, get a certain type of buff. Just the ones that have your kind of leadership. They're within, like, in your party. That would put a bigger value on like some of the really high leadership nations, because they could get a lot more value of these items by putting them on really high leadership commanders, right? So I don't know. I think it's a cool idea. I don't think it's like super important, but I think, it also would help. I think it would be a cool bullet point that I think would sell games. The Bless rebalancing, we already talked about that. Underwater rebalancing, this one's actually reasonably easy to implement. And it's pretty important. In general, I think underwater's probably, all the vets hate underwater. Underwater's banned so many games. I'm like far more moderate. I don't mind playing with underwater, but it's also cancer. I feel like it can be dealt with, but it's not always fun to deal with it. So, I mean, I'm the guy that's there like Bane Venom charming the ocean and stuff like that, and casting Black Death at it and unrest spells until they leave me alone. But I don't know if that's like the best game design. This has been fixed in a lot of mods. I think a lot of people generally agree that some of the ways it's been fixed in other mods, like Dominions Enhanced, is pretty good. I think just like First Pass cut that cost of all of the underwater items, like that allow you to have water breathing, by like half. This can be done by modding, so it doesn't need to be done by Illwinter, but I think there's like broad enough consensus it would be kind of nice to put in the base game. Significant cuts to the cost of underwater items. Have some way, either a spell or an item, where you can remove or partially mitigate the poor amphibian penalty that you're going to get from land troops being underwater. And then finally, having a way for some of the aquatic stuff to come on land, right? So they would also get like a poor land landwalker penalty or something, right? And maybe that could be partially mitigated as well, but maybe not as much or maybe more. I don't know. But, it'd be cool for some of the aquatic nations to have more ways to get on land as well. But yeah, I just doesn't need to be done. It can be done by modding, except for the underwater being able to get on land as an army. I don't think you can do that through modding, but or not easily through modding. So I don't know. I think there's broad enough consensus on this though that the core player base would welcome a change to vanilla. Here's another thing, content-wise, that's pretty cool. I think might help sell games because it's going to be cooler visually. This is in the graphics department. What if when you cast a spell, like you had like a little aura pop up around your sprite? There's a bunch of sprite effects. Like you can turn lucky or whatever, or become ethereal. What if there was some spell effect for that unit, like just when you got hit, and it wasn't based for each spell, it was based on the element of the type. So it'd be really, you just have to have an effect for each element, and that could light up the caster and the target. One of the things that's really hard to see in Dominions is like which units get hit by a spell. Like if you get hit by Gift of Flight, it's really hard to see. So this would make the casters look cooler when they're casting. They'd be like lighting up all the time as they're casting. I think it'd make battles super cool. Maybe there's a way to do it so the only part of them light up, like maybe their hand, which could be like the front, the top right part of the sprite. I don't know. And then the target lights up when they get hit. It'd make it so much easier to see what's happening. And these are like temporary effects, right? This is just like, hey, spell got cast and hit a target, and it's just based on the element of the type of magic. I think that would be a great UI improvement, and it would make the game look cooler. Like in trailers and things. Next up, we have the melee range bug feature. And this basically, if you're playing late age TNG and you have the barbarian heavy horse, they have arrows. What they're going to do is they're going to run forward. If you have them on attack rear, they're going to kill, let's say there's one guy standing here they were targeting. Like when the attack rear thing triggered at the beginning of combat, it's okay, this is our target, he's at the rear. They run forward, they kill him. Instead of still being on attack, they're going to start shooting stuff. If other stuff is really close to them, they might decide to attack. This can be really annoying when you want your stuff to attack. It also plagued me in my late age man game. I wanted my wardens to attack, and they would decide after they killed their first target to go and, shoot stuff with their crossbow. So it would be kind of cool if when they were on attack, they don't, like if you script them to attack, they don't switch back to archery. I think that's kind of how it's intended. I think it's kind of like a bug, but anyway, it would be great if that got fixed. Another one, I think this is up here. I think it's a 4. It would be cool if there were more national spells. This is another one, like Dominions, there's a bunch of mods that add it. So it's like Illwinter doesn't need to necessarily add them. There's a huge mod community that's making stuff. But everybody would rejoice if there were more cool national spells that were, priced to be valuable. Everybody loves that about Dominions, the national spells. So I think that just, and the thing is it takes some nations which maybe don't have a ton of interest or content for them, but there's already a lot of units and sprites, like a lot of the hard work of making them in nations already done. People just aren't in love with them. It's a pretty easy way to just kind of spice it back up. But there's already a lot of this content out there in Dominions Enhanced and other things. I think it'd be cool to see some of that in vanilla, but this isn't actually what I would really expect to see in Dominion 6, but everybody would welcome it. Another thing, this is now maybe a little bit more hard to... Well, no, it's about probably the same difficulty. 3-3 is, I think, what I have it scored at here for this. But more cross-path spells. Cross-path spells are one of the things that kind of are like nation-defining. Because cross-paths tend to be more rare, right? And nations will tend to have only certain cross-paths. So... it's one way to kind of get more national flavor without actually having to do things for each nation. So you kind of get more bang for your buck. And like defining how nations work, like nations with Water Death get the Stygian stuff, right? So that gives them flavor just because those spells exist and most nations don't have access to it, but they do. So anyway, I think that more of that would be cool. The arena rework. All right, here are the problems with the arena. One, There's still a bug where it steals items from people. I think that's still in the game. Two is there's no bracket at all. So a basic bracket in the arena, there doesn't have to be like a UI for it, but if it was just happening in the background. So right now it's just random who fights, right? But if there was some bracket in the background, it would be great. And I think it would, I mean, guys, I made a whole series on the arena. I would love it if there were a bracket. Even if we didn't get to see it, it just was firing off in the background. That would be awesome. The other thing is the arena rewards. It would be cool if you could give gold or gems for it too. That could be a part of the game setting. Do you have high, medium, low, gold, and gem rewards for the arena? That'd be cool. People love the arena. I actually think that's probably the best way for the arena outcome. I think it's gold and gems is probably significantly better than even the items. Like the item could be cool, but the other thing is you probably don't want to you don't want to give somebody a cursed item that may suck and then force them to come back into the arena. I think like if you want players to actually send, like the goal of the arena should be players actually want to send cool shit there to see if they can win. If you want to do that, if you want to get that outcome, but you also like some of the problems with like better arena or balanced arena or whatever, they're like you get artifacts that are like game changing. Like I don't know about that, but like having like if the pot of gold were 1,000 gold for winning the arena or like 2,000 gold for winning and 10 gems, like people are gonna send stuff. Like you're gonna see some fireworks. If there's a pot of gold for 5,000 gold for winning the arena, people are gonna send fully decked out super combatants trying to claim that. Like it's going to be a major commitment. So anyway, the arena could be really cool. And really, it's only some basic changes that are needed to make it way cooler. Like having a bracket and giving gold and gem rewards rather than... I mean, this is the other thing. The arena is so silly in its existing system. Like most of the items you get, like you have imagine you have a really good commander. You send him in, you get an item. You're forced in the current system in vanilla to send him back in. So he gets another item when he wins the next time, right? The item usually has the same buffs. It's like luck and quickness on all the items, right? So getting rid of that, just doing gold and gem rewards, way better, I think. But, you'd have options, different ways to do it. This is my wish list. It's on here. Here's another cool idea. Keeps. This wasn't mine. This is somebody else's. But basically, you have a fort wall. What if there were like, and you could see it in the tactical map, there were like a secondary fort inside that maybe had more entrances or something, but like you could potentially have enough units. If you had like 60 units, you could fit inside. If there's like 60, maybe there's like 40 tiles inside, right? So if you had 80 or 100 units, you could pretty easily fill that up. And that would give you maybe a better way, but maybe there's a lot of entrances. It's not just a front entrance. You have a side entrance, a back entrance. You have all these entrances to it, but it's still sort of closed off. You pack it full of good archers and stuff. I don't know. I think it could add some more complexity and interest. You don't want it too closed off. You don't want it only like a front entrance on a keep. But some of that, I think, could make, and maybe it's expensive or something. I don't know. It could make fort battles more interesting, especially if you can get walls or holes in the siege towers of the outer wall. And then the keep is reasonably porous, but not super porous. Anyway, just an idea. Maybe it's not good, but I thought it was pretty interesting. The other thing, this I've put in the bug report, but it's never been fixed, and so I'm going to put it in here. It used to be you could have like a Eagle King or a Devil, Archdevil. You have them maybe cast a few buffs, like Phoenix Pyre, Summon Storm Power, whatever, and then you do attack, and then you do cast spells, and they will fly into combat. That's how it worked in like Dominions 3. They would fly into combat and then land. And when they landed, oh shit, they would be unleashing Hell's Fury. It'd be like shockwave everywhere, flame eruption, bunch of cool shit. It was just like a cool, epic part of battles. And now you can't do it. Now if you script them to attack, they waddle forward and then cast spells. I want to have like huge, badass mage flying, landing literally in the middle of the enemy army, surrounded by foes, and unleashing Hell's Fury. I want that back. I feel like this super... I don't know what they need to do to fix it, but I feel like if this gets fixed, it would be super cool. All right, UI. Oh God, how are we? We're at an hour now. Yeah, it's a long video. UI. Okay, easiest thing, not easiest, most impactful thing probably in the UI is a preview battle. What does this mean? It means you go to the army setup screen, you hit the preview battle button. Is it going to load you up against the test army? Not really. Maybe it puts some dummy army on the enemy side, but you get to see your army's formation as you would see it on the battlefield. Right? And maybe there's some randomness, like which unit goes where, if they're like overlapping. So it might not be exactly the same as it would be in the actual game. That's fine. You'd be able to see all sorts of things. You'd be able to see them, because maybe you have a dummy that appears on the other side, right? So they could run through their script. You get to see, are you burninating dudes next to you, right? Like, are you killing your own units doing it? How many communion slaves do you have? Because there's that wonderful communion slave tag. I have another thing over here, which communion master count. It would be great in all the battle UIs, whether you do the preview battle or not. If you could see how many communion masters you have. In the tooltip, you can see how many slaves, but not how many masters. So it would be really great if you could see that too. But anyway, you load up the preview battle, you're able to see your formation in real time, and you're able to run through the script. That would be super cool. I think it would be just a huge improvement. Other things. When you hit Y, which is basically, it's the shortcut for everything going to a province, right? So rather than saying, hey, what's the army in this province? It's everything going to that province. If that included magic phase stuff, that would be amazing. It's one of the really hard parts of late game is like remembering all the magic phase things and positioning them in with the rest of the troops. This would be awesome to include magic phase things. In that vein, it's also very hard to remember, especially in a really big map in the late game. Like think about my Bosmos Late Age Relay series, where all your magic phase attacks are going. Like, and you have to spend 5 hours doing your turn at the same time, because if you try to do it piecemeal, you'll forget, like, oh, I had this guy going here, and you end up doing the same thing. What if you had magic phase arrows, right? So I click teleport, I'm going to go from here to here, it draws a magic phase arrow, right? So it'd be a different color than the normal arrow, potentially, right? Or maybe it like does an arc thing instead of going straight, or maybe it's like a little dotted line. You could also have different colors or different types of magic phase arrows for the different types of things. So like there's a color for moving. Maybe you have another color for doing an evocation spell or a remote summon ritual. Or anything other than moving. You could just have two types, moving and then, anything other than moving that's targeting a province. You could even have like site searching, if you wanted to. But anyway, there's a lot of ways to do it, but I think that would be really great. People would love that. I don't know if this would help sell more games, but this would be major service to the fanboys. Resource summary tab in combat. One of the things, it would be great, amazing, if after combat, the battle report, if it showed how much gold was lost on each side, how much gold retreated on each side, and how much gold survived and did not retreat on each side. That would be absolutely amazing. It'd be even more amazing if it showed you gold and gems. But I would be totally fine with just gold. But anyway, that would be, I think, not super hard to do. You'd have to change the game UI. It's like engine stuff, but it would be awesome. Okay, this one, probably a little more tricky, probably a little harder to do, but man, people are screaming for this. Every time I talk about spellcasting AI, people are hollering all about this. So what if when you went to off script, like when you went to put a mage on either cast spells or cast advancing spells, what if you got to say, prioritize buffs, prioritize evocations, prioritize summons, there's things that come with that. We then have to classify spells, maybe based on some of the spell modifiers or something. Maybe you have to classify spells as to what they are. I don't know how hard that would be to do in the engine. But if you had it where you could set them to do we want to do buffs or debuffs or damage spells or summons, once we're off script, if there weren't any spells they could cast, they would do other things, right? But as long as there was stuff they could cast, they would do what you told them. People would riot. They would be so happy for this. People would actually riot. I mean, basically, I'm telling you this, if Illwinter's watching, you could make Dominion 6 and really just include this. new players aren't going to buy. They're going to be like, this is a scam, right? You're trying to just take our money for a basic patch or something. Every single person who plays multiplayer, they would just shut up and give you their money. Like, they really would. If this is the only thing in Dominion 6, everybody would pay for it. They really would. They really would. All right, next one. F1 becomes a sortable, searchable list. So that, one of the hardest things in late game is like finding items. Like, you put a booster on some mage, where did it go? Right? Or, oh, I know I have a Fire 5 mage somewhere. Where is he? And you like sit there scanning through it. I spend so much time doing that, or I have. Having it where you could search for items or levels of mages or a mage name, to me, this seems really hard. I have it on 1 difficulty. I think, you have to like redo the UI for it. It seems really hard to me. It's like basically developing a whole app within a game. To me, this seems hard. Maybe it's really easy, but to me, it seemed really hard. But oh my God, it would be so nice. That would be really nice. I don't know if it's, people wouldn't buy the game just for that, but yeah, it would be super cool. A lot of people have been clamoring for this too, but not as much as this. Other UI things, a larger inventory. Boom. Late game got better, right? People would love a larger inventory. It's super easy to implement. It would just be great. Maybe for some smaller resolutions, you'd have to have like a scrolling function in it or something. I have no idea, but seems great to me. Super easy to implement. Nobody will complain. Communion master number. We've already talked about that. Item management, right? So like sorting items, right? Where you can just like hit a button and it's going to sort. Maybe it puts like one-handed weapons on the first row, then like return. Next row is going to be two-handed weapons. Return. Next row is going to be something. Return. Next row is going to be something. Then when it gets to the bottom, if there's anything left over, it starts doing like left-aligned placing things. There's a bunch of ways to do it. But that would be, sorting items would make inventory management in the late game super nice. In the early and mid game, it doesn't matter. In the late game, this is a big deal. Everybody spends probably 4 or 5 minutes just sorting their items. I like sorting my items into little kits, where it's like, we have a weapon here, a shield here, a hat here, an armor here, a boot here, and then 2 miscellaneous items here. Basically the same format as you would like load them onto a commander. I like having rows so I can see how many kits I have of a certain thing, which I'll load onto thugs. That would be awesome to do too. Seems pretty hard to me. But yeah. The other thing somebody else's suggestion, stackable items, right? You don't need a larger inventory if you can stack them. So you'd have to be tricky with. Like, you don't want to introduce like item duplication bugs and stuff. But yeah, it would be cool. Okay, this next one are things that are irreversible, right? So everybody who's a veteran has definitely multiple times had to redo a turn from scratch because they accidentally clicked a cursed item onto like their god or some important unit and they can't take it off without redoing the turn from scratch. Or they alchemized something and they decided later they didn't want to. Like, they alchemized some gems, they turned some water gems into pearls, and now they want to go back. The only way to go back is to do your turn from scratch. It would be great if the item curse effect didn't take effect until the subsequent turn, right? So you could put a cursed item on somebody, you could take it off, and that's fine. You can't take it off if it's been on them while a turn processes. That would be a great fix for the cursed item. For the alchemy, if it kept track of how many like water gems you turned into pearls, it would just like kept track of that for that current turn on the side. You could just turn that many pearls for free without a cost conversion back into water gems. Once the turn processes, that goes away, right? So the next turn that gets reset. It's an idea to fix that. But this would be nice to have. It's not like people aren't going to freak out if this gets added. But it's probably not super hard to add. It's like a UI change. It's not like just adding some super basic content, but I don't know. Next, it can be really hard to see if you have, like, if I had a guy moving from this province to this province and a guy moving from this province to this province, it's really hard to see the arrows. You basically have these big fat arrows and both of them have like tiny little stubs sticking out at the end. It's really hard to see which guy's moving in which direction. one way to fix that is you either have them bend in certain ways, right? So like there could be a rule about like, the ones going from east to west bend this way, and the ones going from this way to this way bend this way, right? And that would be a really easy way to fix it. So you could have just like kind of random arbitrary bending rules that would make it so the arrows in general didn't follow the same path. The other thing is you could just say, give offsets rather than bending rules. So either offsets, so they're like, the ones going from this province to this province are on this side, and the ones going from this province to this province are on this side. Or you could do arrow bending. That just, I think, it'd be, not super impactful, but probably not that hard. Next is auto PD. There's a mod that can do this that just automatically with events puts one PD in all your provinces. But honestly, it's something for like new players that they never get to see what attacks them because they forget. I think this would just be good to have in vanilla. You could have like an auto PD level, and any gold you don't have at the end of your turn is going to put PD. For it to work well, for people to really use it, it would probably need to go through and like first put one PD in every province, and then go back and put 2, and then put 3. And that way, if you left the turn with like 100 gold in the bank, it would fix any PD issues you have. The other thing, if this is too hard to implement, you could just make it so as soon as you take control of the province, you get 1 free PD in it. And it's free. It's a free gold. That would be basically just as good. Not quite as good. Like a well-developed auto PD feature would be really nice. But like the poor man's version, which is what there's a mod for right now, is just by default, you get a free PD everywhere. That would be almost as good. Anywho, that's basically the list, guys. Of course, there's a ton of stuff, right? And I have no idea what Illwinter will or won't wish for. You can feel free to comment on the stuff I've suggested here in the comments, right? But if you actually want stuff that Illwinter will actually read, go to the Steam forums, right? Post stuff here. Let's see if we can get this list to like 6,000. Also, the other reason I'm doing this is like, I want to hype Dominion 6. I have no idea if, when, how it's coming out. But if it does, I want to get the hype train started right now. So with that, I will leave you. Peace. Take care. See you guys.